making this video to show you how to make bomb-ass chili. It's a pretty cheap recipe, and it's pretty easy to make. I'm making this because you really shouldn't be eating chili out of a can. Alright, well, you're going to need 1 onion, a jalapeno, fresh tomato if you have it. If not, canned diced tomatoes will do. You're also going to need pinto beans, tomato sauce, and a small can of tomato paste, which I did not show here. Of course, you're going to need the ground beef, anywhere from 1 to 3 pounds. And as far as seasonings go, you're going to need the ground chili pepper, onion and garlic, cumin and oregano, paprika, salt, and then ground red pepper. Normally you'd have these items in your kitchen, ingredients in your kitchen, but if you don't, it's real easy. You can buy these make at home chili kits. I like this one. It's the 2-alarm chili kit, and it comes with everything you need seasoning wise. So it's really not that many products, but the onion's pretty necessary, and in my opinion I like the jalapeno too. I diced those beforehand, so those are both fresh. You're going to want to brown the meat on the stove. You're going to put it in a pan on a little bit less than medium heat, because you're going to want to cook it a little bit slower. The recipe calls for 2 pounds, but since I have the beans and diced tomatoes, I only used 1 pound of ground beef in this certain batch. So you've got the ground beef in the pan. Like I said, it's on medium to low heat. That's about 3 or 4 out of 10. And let that start to cook. While we're doing that, I'm going to strain the diced tomatoes. I've already strained them, so now I'm putting them to the side until we're ready to add it. There's a lot of extra juice in those cans, so I like to strain it. Then we're going to strain the pinto beans, which is very important. I even like giving them a rinse. Canned food is iffy with me, so I like to give it a rinse to make sure it's just the beans, none of the canned liquid that came with it. And we're going to put that to the side with the canned tomatoes that have been strained. And we'll put that to the side and go back to the meat now that's been browning on the stove. It's starting to sizzle. You don't need to add any oil, by the way, when cooking ground beef, obviously, because it'll cook in its own fat. Don't have to worry about it sticking. Fat that you're actually going to have to drain later on. Now when it comes to cooking this meat, you want to undercook it, because it's going to stew in the chili. It's going to simmer, because I let the chili sit for a while. So you undercook it here, because the worst thing that can happen with the chili is that you overcook the ground beef and it gets a little bit hard. You want it to be tender. I've been making this chili for a few years now. So now, in a different pan, add about tablespoon of olive oil, and I'm going to throw the onions in there, and that's going to be on medium heat as well. I just want to soften the onions a little bit before I add it to the chili. We're going to let the onions sit in there before we add the jalapeno and tomato, because I want the onions to soften a little bit more than I want the jalapeno to soften. So you're going to want to make sure that all the onions are coated with the olive oil, so none burn and they can soften evenly. And that's on medium heat. You'll know when the onions are starting to cook. You'll smell it and you can hear it. Jalapenos will come later. I'd say after about 5 minutes of the onions being in there, you could drop in the other two. And that's what the final product should look like. That's after it's been off the heat for a while, so it's not quite as appealing looking. But now is when you combine everything. We've already drained the fat from the ground beef, so now the ground beef goes in. There's no heat on this yet. So ground beef, and then we're going to add the vegetables, which are the onions, jalapenos, and the tomatoes that I've cut up. And we're going to add our diced tomatoes that were canned and the pinto beans that we've strained and rinsed. So we've got it all together. Now we're going to turn it on. Everything's pretty much medium to low heat. This is a slow meal to cook. So once it's in there, you're going to add the tomato sauce. It's just 1 can. As of now, I haven't noticed a difference between the expensive sauce and the cheap sauce. There's so many ingredients that if it's done right, it doesn't really matter how much you spend. Preferably, you'd want all this to be fresh, but the only fresh ingredients that I really have are obviously the ground beef and then the onion and the jalapeno. A lot of people say it's a sin to add beans to chili. A lot of people, the majority of people I'd say, but I like my chili so spicy that if I didn't have the beans, it would be way too spicy. Same with the tomatoes. Not everyone likes diced tomatoes, but to be honest, I like the extra bite. Now the important part. The chili needs a lot of water. More water than you'd think. Just use the same can that the tomatoes came in, or the beans. And you're going to want to pour 1 to 1.5 cans of water straight into the chili. And now that it's on the heat, you're going to let that heat up, okay, and everything will start to soften. And that water will cook down a little bit. So I've added the tomato paste to the chili now and stirred it in. And now we're going to start to add the seasonings. That's the garlic and onion. And the cumin and oregano. And then we're going to add the paprika, which I dropped directly into the chili. I have to fish it out. And then the salt. This chili kit can be found at any grocery store, really. Now this is the red pepper This is what gives the chili the spiciness. If you have people that you're cooking this chili for that don't like spice, don't add all that pepper. I, for one, love spice, so I add all of it, as well as another hot sauce. It's called sriracha, and if you don't have this in your kitchen, you need it. Now that's the ground chili peppers. That's the biggest amount of seasoning that you have that you need to add. And stir that up. That'll really help thicken the chili. Because before this, you would look at the chili and think that it's too liquid. But that really helps it thicken up. And that's why you have to add so much water, more than you'd think to add. Because you're going to have so much dry seasoning. Just go ahead and stir it in. Make sure it's evenly spread. You can see it's starting to come together, starting to actually look like chili. Go ahead and add the rest of it. I like to add it 2 separate times so it's more evenly spread throughout the chili. It's still on medium to low heat. Here's the sriracha. It's an Asian hot sauce. It's really good. It's really spicy too, but it has great flavor, and you could add it to almost anything. You'll know if you ask any chef. That's a popular thing to have in the kitchen, and it's absolutely amazing in chili. Unfortunately, I'm running low. Actually, that's probably the end of it right there. So that's preparation's pretty much done. Now you're just going to let it sit, put a top on it, and let it stew for a bit on the stove, still on the same heat. And that's your final product. Being that I'm born and raised in Texas, I feel safe to call this Texas chili. And that's what it looks like. You can see the onions, and the beans, and the ground beef, the tomatoes, jalapenos. Really good and pretty cheap, and it'll feed a lot of people. So thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed.